Started this morning, we'd also like to thank our sponsors. Our voltage sponsors include Constellation, an Exelon company, Constellation and Nuclear Powers Maryland, a like-minded coalition of organizations looking to recognize Maryland as an important opportunity to become a clean energy leader by embracing carbon-free nuclear power. We're also grateful to have Siemens. Siemens is a world-class energy company, and they have a headquarters based in Beltsville. So we're really happy to have them as sponsors today. We do have a big panel, but we also have included on our panel one of our keynote sponsors who has sponsored the entire series from Cohn Resnick. Their advisory assurance and tax firm with a base in Bethesda. So now I'd like to welcome our special guest for today's program. The full bios of all of our speakers can be viewed online at www.mdcleanenergy.org/speaker series. The title of our program looks at the future of transportation, and we are so pleased to have Delegate Brooke Learman from the House Environment and Transportation Committee, who represents District 46 in the Maryland General Assembly, as our moderator this morning. Delegate Learman is an effective and passionate advocate in the General Assembly and a modern-day juggler. She's a mother of two, a wife, a state legislator, and a disability rights and civil rights attorney. Brooke was elected to represent the 46th Legislative District in 2014, and she's currently in her second term. She's earned a reputation as an effective advocate and skilled legislator who works tirelessly on behalf of her constituents to get to the root of causes of poverty and inequity in Baltimore, including education, transit, and environmental and social justice. Brooke has successfully passed legislation to invest and improve in public transit, fund evidence-based gun violence, and end cash bail. She is also engaged in work to stem the school-to-prison pipeline and close loopholes in our family and paid leave laws. Outside of the legislative session, Delegate Learman maintains an active presence in her neighborhoods, visiting schools and meeting with business leaders, and she is currently a candidate for state comptroller. Just a little personal side note about Delegate Learman. At this time of year, we're all sort of thinking about Halloween costumes. I asked her what her favorite Halloween costume ever was, and she shared with me that while she was in law school at the University of Texas in Austin, she wore a pair of waders and carried an oar as a Halloween costume and went as Roe v. Wade. Very creative to add to your list. Thank you, Delegate Learman. Glad to have you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Kathy. Great to be with all of you and our amazing panel today. I really appreciate everybody who's joining us. It's great to see you all on Zoom. And this is a really timely and important topic. So it's great to have you all here. Transportation has just become, I think, had a bit of a renaissance as an issue in Maryland, and with good reason, because transportation touches so many aspects of our life and touches so many aspects of the economy. And so, really thinking about the future of transportation, you can think about it through a lens of the environment, of course, because transportation is the single largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions. You can think about transportation through an energy lens, which we are thinking about it through today, of course, and thinking about how do we make sure we're electrifying our fleet. What does that mean? What does that look like? What is a different kind of transportation technology? In MDOT's greenhouse gas reduction plan, they went through transportation technology, congestion mitigation, VMT reduction, vehicle miles traveled reduction, and infrastructure design, opportunities for developing clean energy while also ensuring the design that's resilient to climate change impacts. So we've got environmental, energy, and then of course there's the transportation as what helps connect neighbors and connect communities and get people to and from work. And so it's just so important that we think about all the different ways that transportation affects our lives, and that we're doing everything we can here in Maryland to build a robust multimodal transportation system that will connect communities, will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and prepares us for climate change, right? Both prevents climate change and also prepares and mitigates the effect of it. And today we have some wonderful panelists who are going to tackle different topics. And so I am really excited to bring on, we're going to have Christy Granacki, Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo, Corey Neal, and I'm missing one person. Oh, Joseph Alfred and Swami Venkat. So we're really excited to hear from all of them. I'm going to introduce them one at a time so we don't sort of go through all of their bios at once because they're all so incredible. But we are going to start with Christy. So Christy, Christy hasn't joined yet. So we're going to start with Delegate Fraser Hidalgo. So Delegate Fraser Hidalgo is my colleague on the Environment and Transportation Committee. He has represented District 15 in Montgomery County since 2013, and he chairs our Motor Vehicle and Transportation Subcommittee. He's also the chair of the Maryland Legislative Latino Caucus. Now, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo has really been our champion on EV issues and thinking about electrification. And he recently published a great op-ed in Maryland Matters that I encourage you all to take a look at. So really excited to have Delegate Fraser Hidalgo join us today to kick things off. Thanks. Go for it, Delegate.
Thank you, Delegate Lehrman. It's good to see you. And good to see everybody. Thank you, Kathy, for having me on. Delegate Lehrman, I think you did a great job kind of setting the groundwork for what's coming to some degree in the future. I'll just touch a couple of points and then we can get into them in more detail should the questions head in that direction. So when we talk about electrification of kind of the fleet of vehicles moving forward, we have to talk about the resiliency of that, and moving from fossil fuels to electrification means we're going to have to come up with a lot more energy and a lot more electricity. That's going to mean more solar, more wind, hopefully all renewables, which is partially what my op-ed was about. And that's a really bright future when it comes to climate change. As Delegate Lehrman said, transportation is the #1 source for greenhouse emissions, and we have to do everything we can to mitigate that. Also, with electrification is also going to come autonomy, and the great thing about autonomy is that's going to lead to less car accidents. That's going to lead to safer roads. I know people are very concerned with what that means at the moment, and I agree. But as the data matures, as the platforms mature, as we get more data, the data is more relevant. I think that we will very quickly in the future see that actually autonomous driving is actually going to be significantly safer than human beings. That moving forward, let's see. We're also talking about not only cars, but we're talking about buses. So I've done a lot of work on transitioning the school bus fleet, which I think is exceptionally important, right? We're taking our kids, our more precious, and we're putting them on a school bus, which the particulate matter in a school bus can be up to 3 times higher than the particulate matter outside of a school bus. So we're also taking into consider not only climate change and reducing our carbon footprint, but also public health. And I think that's a really important piece as we move forward in transitioning. There's a huge public health piece that I think is being underrepresented and under-discussed. Also transit buses. So Delegate Corman has had some bills in the past, and I think that MDTA is moving toward electrification of their buses and hydrogen buses as well. So all of that is exciting coming up. Remember, you have people coming on those buses. You have, from an environmental justice perspective, people coming on the buses, the bus drivers, all of the neighborhoods around the bus depots. Transitioning the bus fleet, whether that's a school bus fleet or a public bus fleet, to electric is paramount, again, from a public health, environmental justice, as well as a climate change perspective. I think in the future, we can talk about more in detail again. I think you're already seeing some communities talking about the need for parking lots because of the autonomy, the cost of autonomous driving and Ubers. And lifts will go down substantially. So I think you'll see the next generations maybe think that they don't need to actually own a car. That's probably more like the 8 to 10 or 12 years away, but it's coming, and I think it's going to come faster than most people realize. And I think there's also some very inventive ways of moving people in a larger way, in a public transit way. When it comes to buses, when it comes to bus rapid transit, when it comes to dedicated bus lanes, when it comes to clean and green buses. And also when we look at things like maglev, Monorail, Boring Company, there are a lot of really cool options in the future for moving people and goods that I think is going to be really, really exciting to see. And of course, the less you move people, the less you have to move people, the less electrons that are burned, and hopefully those are renewable electrons. But if they're not renewable electrons, the least amount of electrons we use, the better, which means we're doing a Zoom right now instead of all of us driving in our car and driving somewhere. That is really cool. We don't always have to go into the office, right? And that's going to provide some additional important opportunities moving forward as far as greening up our transportation sector. There's more, but I've taken a couple minutes, and I think it's probably best if I pass it on to someone else, and we can come back in Q&A if we want to talk about any of those things. All of them are super exciting to me, as I think Brooke will attest. I get pretty passionate about this stuff, and it's great to have in our committee to have Brooke sitting right next to me, because we text back and forth about all this policy and votes, and I love it. So thank you.
Yes, and hopefully we won't be on Zoom next session, right? For my final session in the House, I would like to not be on Zoom. Really excited now to have Corey Neal, who is the president of K. Neal Truck and Bus Center. Corey is, which is a full service commercial dealership servicing the greater Washington, D.C. metro area in 4 locations. It is ranked number 35 in the top 100 largest minority-owned businesses in the nation by Black Enterprise, and continues to support the trucks, buses, and people who move the world. Corey is a 2020 Washington Business Journal 40 under 40. Awesome. He's in Eastern Michigan, an AU grad, an active board member, and also we were talking about basketball and sports before the call started. So he can also go through his litany of favorite basketball players with you as well. So Corey, it's great to have you on. Congrats on all your amazing success, and really excited to hear your perspective on this.
Well, thank you. And, we'll save the basketball for later on, just so we stay on topic. But as you said earlier, my name is Corey Neal, and I represent K. Neal Truck and Bus Center. We're a full service commercial truck and school bus dealership. So everything that kind of gets in the way on the road, that's large and in a way, that's what we sell and we service. So I like to take the position here of what are we doing to help serve our customers? At the end of the day, as a dealer, it is our job to create the trucks and the school buses that are going to do all the things in regards to making our world greener, in regards to providing a better sustainable transportation solution for us moving forward. One of the things I think that is unique, and I think Delegate Fraser talked about this a little bit earlier, that is that right now it's a unique time because manufacturers, dealers, and customers are all taking this first step hand in hand. Everybody's kind of taken this first step into electrification in these massive overhauls together. So it's a unique time, but I think in these unique times, it provides great opportunity. And I think that, for us, one of the things that we think that are not being addressed at the level that we need to is a training. When you're talking about going from a diesel powered engine or a gas powered engine to a hydrogen or electric powered engine, we're going to have to do a lot for training. And I think that's not only going to create jobs, but I think that's going to help make people, better educated overall in regards to the transportation space. A lot of conversation about barriers. What is it going to take to get this done from a dealer standpoint and from a customer standpoint? Obviously, barriers are cost. That is one of the things that we are trying to overcome as technology gets better. If we think about that plasma screen TV 25 years ago, how much it cost when it first came out compared to what it costs today, I think we'll see similar things of that in this electrification space as this space continues to grow and that technology continues to advance. There are a lot of new products hitting the market today. We represent the Navistar brand, the Hino, and the Zuzu brand, which all have some level of alternative fuel sources today. Navistar just released, I think we talked about school bus a little earlier. We just released our new IC school bus, which we'll be unveiling on October 19th at our dealership, which will be very exciting. And I'm glad to take more questions about products in general. But one thing that's unique in the marketplace is we're seeing new entrants. As we saw Tesla come into the market, you're seeing a lot of different commercial manufacturers that are coming into the industry. I think we're seeing that on the car side as well. So, more to come on what that shapes out to be. And if those new manufacturers are able to withstand, once the Fords, the Chevys, the Damlers, as well as the Navistars really kind of understand what direction they want to go in the transportation space. In addition, one thing I think to talk about in the transportation space is driver shortage. Driver shortage is something that has been on top of mind for a very long time. So what are we doing to address that driver shortage? Because we can make any type of vehicle that we want. If we don't have people to drive the vehicles, we're going to have to go back to Delegate David a little earlier. We may have to go autonomous before we're ready to go autonomous, just because we don't have enough drivers to be able to fill these buses that are taking our most precious thing in the world, our kids, and the transportation of our goods and services in our trucks. Last thing, as I'm nearing up on my 2 minutes, is just a commercial consideration. This is especially true for over-the-highway vehicles. As we look at electrification, battery packs are something that are heavier than your typical filling of a diesel unit. So when we think about that, in the transportation space, weight is a very big topic, because that's just how much you can transport, how much a load can be worth. So when you think about things such as hydrogen and those other technology, those are technology I believe are still going to be considered. Just simply put, the weight of battery packs today is something that we haven't really found an answer to. But overall, as a dealership representing all the dealers, that aren't on this call, that are on all this call, I think that we're going to be able to provide options. And I think it's one of those things that, that's the best thing that we can do, because overall, we have to do a better job of our green footprint. And all these things that we are talking about help us get there and help us have more sustainable fleet moving forward. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. It's a very important perspective to have as we move forward in all of this. So excited now to welcome Joseph Alfred, who is the CEO of Ally Power. He's also the sole investor of the hydrogen and electric gas station, which has a pending patent, and he's a co-host for the Hydrogen and Electric Power podcast. He sees really the transportation and utility sector shifting away from carbon-intensive sources of power toward more hydrogen and electric solutions. And that's, of course, a lot of what we're talking about today. So Joseph, it's great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Delegate, for having us, and for the Maryland Clean Energy Center for having this really great discussion and panel. I think it's very needed and very timely. I wanted to use this first 2 minutes to go over a little primer on the hydrogen industry, because it is also in a series of transition. So it does follow colors in terms of when we're talking about different types of hydrogen. So black hydrogen, for example, would be for coal gasification, where you're taking coal and you're making hydrogen from the coal. Gray hydrogen would be from steam methane, and that's another way that we can generate hydrogen. And those two are the primary ways that we actually generate hydrogen in the market currently. Blue hydrogen is gray hydrogen, but it's with a carbon capture component to it. And there's a lot of industry perspectives going on currently as to whether or not this should be the way that we should go in terms of a transition from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen would be blue hydrogen. Purple hydrogen is another color. That would be for nuclear-based hydrogen sources. So we use the nuclear heat to heat up the steam, and it's easier to get an electrolysis once that water is generated into steam. So that's another color. And then green hydrogen is seen to be the best overall, because it is a zero emission way to make hydrogen. And then that hydrogen, if you use it in transportation, is also going to be a zero emission source of transportation. So the whole cycle is green. And the current way to make green hydrogen is through electrolysis and using solar or wind. So if you tie all those systems together, you're going to have green hydrogen. There's other ways to make green hydrogen that my company is pioneering. And we see the market as going in both directions simultaneously in terms of transportation, both electric battery and hydrogen. As Corey stated, the hydrogen is most likely going to be for the long haul trucking market, where there's certain advantages over electric battery currently. In the electric car market, it's certainly more popular right now in terms of Tesla, in terms of all the other electric battery cars that are hitting the market. They are being sold at much more volume than the current hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Even though they are in existence, the infrastructure isn't there yet in order to provide the necessary fuel. There's also a lack of consumer awareness about the availability of these types of vehicles. And then there's also just the popularity effect of brands like Tesla that have the ability to attract a wide consumer audience. So we, as a hydrogen and electric gas station company, want to provide both options for consumers. We know that the gas station industry revolves around as many people coming into and using those gas stations as possible. So we want to provide both types of zero emission solutions, whether that's recharging an electric battery vehicle or refueling a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle at our stations. And that's my 2 minutes.
Great, thank you. Everyone's so on time. I'm so impressed. Thank you so much for that. And now we're going to hear from Swami Venkat, who is a partner in the CFO advisory practice leader at Cohn Resnick. Swami leads the practice which provides accounting, advisory, and support services to the office of the CFO. He has more than 20 years of diverse professional experience across technical accounting, public company reporting, risk and compliance, and internal audit. And this experience really includes a lot, including SEC and GAAP advisory services and helping companies really prepare for financial statements. So really excited to have Swami with us today. He has worked for years in this space, looking at accounting advisory projects and transaction readiness. So a really interesting perspective to round out this panel. Thank you, Swami.
Thanks, and good morning, everyone. Thanks, Delegate Brooke, Delegate Brooke Learman. So I know, starting with Delegate David Fraser, going on to Corey and Joseph, there was a lot of discussion on the industry itself, right? What is EV? Why EV is important? I plan to deliver, as you had mentioned a bit earlier on, a slightly different take to this. I'm going to look at the evolution of EV, specifically from a capital market standpoint. I lead, as you mentioned, I lead CFO advisory services for Cohn Resnick, but I'm also part of the renewable energy practice within our firm, which specializes in solar, wind, and EV, electric vehicle, companies. So my goal is to talk a little bit about, as we go through this process, many of you are going to cover why EV is important, what are some of the benefits. I'm going to give it a couple of color and context to it, specifically from what everybody would have been hearing, pretty much every single day, ESG, how ESG and the corporate world are going to interact, and how actually companies reducing their carbon footprint is going to be one of the measures, one of the things that investors will be very closely watching as we continue to make progress in this industry. And also how an electric vehicle company is going to be valued by the markets. We know there are some tried and tested companies like the Teslas who actually have these vehicles, on the road. But if you look at the capital markets today, there are a number of companies out there that have still not yet started commercial production, right? And yet you see the markets valuing them at billions and billions of dollars. In comparison to some of the companies that have already been existent, right? You look at the Toyotas, the Fords of the world, you look at their market cap and some of the market cap of these EV companies, you go like, how is it fair? These companies have been in existence for years and years, some for decades, right? And then you have a startup that has still not delivered a commercial vehicle, and yet the valuation, is being embraced by the markets. So we're going to touch a little bit into what are some of the concepts, what is driving this, as we get through the remaining of the panel discussion. Thanks.
Thank you for that. That was great. So now, before we start the Q&A, I think we have a couple more polling questions to do. So I'm going to turn it back to Kathy and the team. So if a poll should be appearing on your screen, and tell us a little bit more about what you drive. What do you currently own or operate? Take a look here and let us know. Okay, those results coming in. Give you a couple more seconds. Hopefully you know right away what it is you own or operate. So there we go. We've got 12% EV owners, 6% operators, some hybrid owners out there, mostly gas powered, and none of the above. So maybe you're a bicyclist or a transit rider exclusively. That's great. Awesome. I think we have one more polling question. Yeah. Which factor most discourages you from owning or operating an electric vehicle? What do you think? I will say, living in Baltimore City in a row house, there are a number of people who I know who would love to have an EV, but there's no place to charge it. Oh, and look at that. That was the number one, lack of access to charging infrastructure. There you go. So thanks so much. That was great, really interesting. And now we're going to turn it over and we're going to, I think if we could just show all the panelists at the same time, that would be great. Don't need me, but everybody else who's going to answer questions, and we will open up the Q&A. So we have a few questions already. So Joanne says, I'd like to see mentioned and discuss transportation energy in addition to electricity. For example, the recently released report from Frederick City and County Climate Emergency Mobilization Work Group includes in a recommendation, begin using renewable fuels in municipal and county fleets and equipment as soon as possible. Provide consumer education, encouragement and facilitation of renewable fuel use in collaboration with the business and agricultural communities. And Frederick Municipal Airport should provide sustainable aviation fuel as soon as possible, as well as encourage local fuel supply businesses to increase renewable fuel options. Any thoughts? She goes on, and in the next question that she posts, it looks like you've posted, thanks, Joanne, some more information on those recommendations. Any comments on the idea of transportation energy in general, in addition to electricity?
The only comment that I would have, and maybe this is a little bit tough, is that depending on what alternative energy or what that means, if it's not electrons or if it's not hydrogen, which creates, the electrons to turn the electric motor, I'm not quite sure how we get to where we need to be from a climate change perspective with other fuels. So I'm happy to hear, excited to hear about what those other fuels may be that we're burning, but from a plane perspective, I think there's some experiments going on now with electric battery driven planes. So that's kind of exciting, but
it's crazy.
Yeah, I'll leave it there. No, they're really cool too.
That's cool. It's just amazing. So another, then Alberto has a couple of questions that are similar. What's the timeline of autonomous driving in your opinion? And do you envision sending our children on driverless buses in the future? So I'm guessing that a few folks have responses or thoughts on that. So tell us your thoughts.
This is Corey, so I'll hop in. On the autonomous vehicle side, I think that the technology is really not so much dependent on the vehicles, but I think more or less the overall, network and grid, and the sustainability and the growth of, call it the 5G network or the 6G network or whatever that next evolution of technology is. Just to make sure that you have the level of connectivity that you need to be able to securely and safely take not only transportation goods, but to the next point, the students and kids. I think that obviously it is a very, big idea to think of a 60 or 70 passenger vehicle carrying around kids with no level of supervision and or, no level of adult presence. So that's something that I think that as we grow and as we become more comfortable with technology and as it becomes more proven, I think that it is something that will eventually come into play. I don't think a lot of people know that oftentimes the majority of these buses do have school aides on the school buses. They're not just a driver only. So those are things that I think will help mitigate these things. And I think that the idea of going autonomous, there's a stage of when we will have people in the vehicle that are capable of driving and taking over the vehicle if something. So I don't see that this is a flip a switch type thing. I think this is a gradual curve, similar to a lot of the other technologies that come into play. I just think that right now we live in a world where technology and information is so much more readily available than it used to be. So now we're hearing stuff now in implementation and idea phase, whereas I think that, you know, in times before, we were only hearing about stuff when it was already ready and proven.
I think I'll just add one thing to that, Corey, you know, just from a market expectation standpoint, right? I think Delegate David Fraser had hit upon this earlier, right? Transportation as a service, TaaS, right? Wherein you pay a monthly subscription and, you know, you don't have to own a car. You know, these autonomous cars are going to come, pick you up, drop you off wherever, you know, you want to. I know it's like probably a sci-fi movie, you know, from the 2040s or 2050s that we are thinking of. But trust me, it's not too far, off. You have a number of technology companies, right? That it's almost a race to get there first. You have the Apples, you have the Googles, you have so many startups. Each and every one of these companies, right, want to get there with autonomous driving, and then eventually, you know, expand this into transportation as a service. One of the things that Uber, you know, besides we all know Uber, you know, for hailing, it's like hailing a ride, or Uber Eats. But one of the things that Uber has been aggressively working on is these self-driving, you know, autonomous cars, because they want to be the first to get to the transportation as a service, right? And Corey, you're absolutely right. It's going to be staged because you got to learn to walk before you can run. So there will come a time wherein these vehicles might be driving by itself, but you will have passengers or you know, co-pilots, for lack of a better term, because once it becomes autonomous, it's autopilot. So you're probably going to have a co-pilot be there just in case. But absolutely, you know, in 10, 12 years, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some form of this, you know, actually hitting the markets. And the market is thinking of this as an emerging technology, right? You look at the valuations of some of these companies. Yes, the current state and the growth from the current pipeline is included, but there is also an appetite in the market, you know, in terms of valuation as to who will get there first, and there is a premium for it. Thanks.
I would just add one little piece because I agree with both the previous speakers. They are right on. I think that it's not going to be the technology that holds us back from going full autonomy in society. I think it's going to be society. It's going to be lawmakers. It's going to be rule makers that are like, whoa, 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 let's hold on. Is this really what we're doing? Because you can look on YouTube now and you can see full autonomous vehicles. There's several of them, several manufacturers, where you can almost go from point A to point B currently without touching the steering wheel. It's pretty, if you watch them, it's pretty crazy. And then as far as the adoption timeline, there's a really famous photo that was taken in Times Square in 1905, I believe. And that photo, it was then taken again 10 years later in 1915. And that photo was in the same place, at the same time of day, on the same date, different year, you know, 10 years later. And in the first photo, all you see are horses and buggies in the whole Times Square area. And then 10 years later, that same photo is the exact opposite, because in that first 1905 photo, there's one tiny little car and all buggies and horses. And then 10 years later, it's the exact opposite. You see one little horse and buggy and it's all cars. So when you look at the adoption of the iPhone, when you look at those kinds of adoptions, I think you'll see that's going to happen a lot faster than we think.
I agree. Thank you for that. So a couple more questions for the energy sector representatives. Has an analysis been done to determine the increase in demand on the grid to achieve the targets for electrification of fleets? Any thoughts on how this will, the impact that this increase will have on the grid from anyone?
Yes, the reason why we wanted to build the stations the way we do is for that exact issue. We wanted to be able to produce electricity at the same time we're producing hydrogen, so that we're not going to be a drain on the grid, that we can actually have a function of being a microgrid for solar or wind power, that if we're making too much electricity at a certain time, we'd be able to store that electricity at our stations and then put it onto the grid when the grid needs it the most. So that is certainly an issue that we're looking into, and there are solutions on the table, not just ours. There's battery storage in various forms, various companies that are trying to do battery storage that are connected to the solar and wind so that we can store that energy for when the grid needs it the most.
That's great. Thank you. And Paul says, can we really wait another 10 years to have hydrogen to be cost effective, especially with the low electric output when the round trip actual electric production cost is taken into account? Any thoughts on that?
No, we can't wait another 10 years.
Yeah.
In my view, I think that that great example that Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo made about the horse and buggy versus the car, I think that we need to have within the next 10 years a hydrogen infrastructure which is much more built up than it is currently, and we would like that infrastructure to be built up alongside an electrification infrastructure as well, so that both types of zero emission vehicles can be provided for, so that consumers have options. The best way to make our way away from carbon fuels is to give the consumer as many zero emission options as possible, so that when they do make a choice, it's going to be zero emission.
Yep, that is a great way of putting it. And for Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, who is the expert on this, it has been 10 years since Governor O'Malley introduced the EV excise tax credit, although let's note that it was introduced by a delegate and a senator, and then Governor O'Malley signed it. So it was a joint effort. And now there's a long wait between the purchase of an EV and the owner receiving the tax credit, which reduces the incentive the credit was designed to induce. How do you see the EV tax credit working in the future? Can the tax credit be given at point of sale, like the proposed federal EV credit? Thank you for all of your work on this issue. That's from Kevin and from me. I appreciate all your work on this issue. This is a complicated issue, and we have had lots of hearings and discussions about it. So Delegate, feel free to jump in and tell them what you think.
Sure. Wow. This is a really complicated issue, right? So we've done a lot of these tax incentives, credits, all kinds of ways to try to promote the transition to electric vehicles. So we are currently, I think, about 37,000 electric vehicles registered in the state of Maryland, which is very, very far away from our goal. But it has picked up recently in just the last 6 months at a much more dramatic pace, which is kind of fascinating that it's picked up in a much more dramatic pace in the middle of a pandemic. So there's that, which I think is great. One of the big issues that we have is that traditionally what we've done is taken that money out of what's called the SEIF, or Strategic Energy Investment Fund. And because climate change finally is becoming more apparent to other members of the legislature, there are more hands going into that SEIF bucket asking for money for all kinds of other things, which is making it a little bit more difficult to find revenues, to find state money to help encourage people to buy EVs. Also, the cost of EVs is coming down dramatically. So when we first passed the bill, it was like, $3,000 tax, Maryland excess tax credit on any vehicle. And then we dropped it till, as time went on and the cars became cheaper, we dropped it to like 64,000 or 63,000. And then this last year, we couldn't get it across the finish line, but we got a bunch of money to backfill all the people that had actually purchased them that are waiting on their tax credits. So we're going to have to do some creative things moving forward to find other ways of promoting electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure. The other piece of this is electric vehicle infrastructure. And there are a lot of players in that game. I won't get into the names, but we really need to figure out a way to have more of a standard. There are like 3 kind of standards right now in the electric vehicle charging for car chargers, and that's proving to be difficult. I think we're going to see kind of like a VHS Betamax or record or tape versus CD or DVD thing. So that's going to have to play out, and I'm looking for creative ways of finding some revenue potentially. I have a lot of ideas in my head, but the question is what's viable, right? And these are the things, like some of the things that I talked with Delegate Learman about. It's like, would this really fly? Could we really get this through? Would it put it into a different committee? Would that put it into a committee where it would be harder to pass? So there's a lot of pieces to this, but we're going to continue moving forward, finding ways to fund not only the purchasing of electric vehicles, but I think you're going to see a little bit of an emphasis placed on figuring out how to create better charging facilities so that people can charge in a more dependable way. I recently talked to somebody, not you, Delegate Learman, but someone else that went to a charging facility that there were 6 chargers and 5 of them were down. 5 of them that just didn't work. They just were not operating. And that's unacceptable. I mean, you can't promote this moving forward if people can't charge their vehicles. So we're working on that as well.
I agree. And I will say, as an EV driver, I face a lot of charging stations that are broken. And I would rather that charging station not exist at all than be broken when I get there, because I almost did not make it back from Ocean City after Mako, because there were 2 charging stations in a row that were both broken. And so it was a close call. So I definitely echo that. There are a lot of reasons that people are not ready yet to jump into EVs. What about road construction itself, asks Benjamin Beer. Traditional road construction methods and materials have a very large carbon footprint, and some of the green methods are either extremely costly or they scale poorly. The widespread adoption of EV and the future of autonomous transportation will require changes to the infrastructure itself. What considerations need to be made to construction methods and materials and the maintenance of the infrastructure itself? That's a great question. I just visited an asphalt and cement plant the other day and just saw that in California, they are actually changing some of the requirements for cement to allow more recycling. Maryland has not been at the forefront of allowing for recycled content in our roadways, which impacts all local governments too, because if the federal government gives any money to local governments for roads construction, the local governments have to follow state law. So it's really important for MDOT to be pushing the envelope on recycled content in our roads and creative new methods. But I'll turn it over to the panel as well. What are your thoughts on road construction? Any thoughts?
If nobody has any, I don't want to keep jumping in.
Go for it.
One of the things I think we need to consider is how we move more people in a transit kind of an environment. And one of those, just picking one project off the top of my head, is Monorail. Like, one of the really, really cool things about Monorail is that you can derive the energy by renewables. Obviously, that's what we have to do. But also, it's like one concrete pillar every 120 feet. So if we can find a way to use more recycling in that concrete, or change what that is to make it to have a lower carbon footprint, from a stormwater management perspective, you're not laying a bunch of asphalt or concrete that now creates a plethora of other environmental problems. As well as things like maglev or boring or other ways of moving people in a more environmentally friendly way. Moving larger groups of people, I think, is going to be one of the big ways that we need to consider moving forward. Every time we can take a car off the road, that's a really good thing.
And I would just piggyback on the back of that too, similar to your comment before in regards to the charging stations being down. In this comment as well, I think the training of our people and the training of these companies that are making asphalt, the training of the companies that have to do the renewable and that have to do the recycling to make this renewable technology and or goods and services to sell. Oftentimes as business owners, I think that we want to be green. We want to do the right things. I think that the cost analysis has to work. So whatever that kind of the cost analysis needs to make work for business owners. And I also think that the training, helping us understand the better way to do it in the way that, so that we can continue to grow and thrive. But I often think that training, whether it's the charging facilities, I'm pretty sure the reason why they're not up and working is because they don't know how to fix them, right? Or they don't have a sustainable method or a sustainable tree to be able to go out and fix stuff where there's not routine maintenance. Going back to the comment on the roadways, how much routine maintenance are we really doing in front of this so that we're not doing fix as fail? We're actually in front of things and we're doing things in a much more programmatic way. There's always more savings in that route than commenting on, obviously, the more people we can get on larger vehicles, that's less wear and tear on the road. That's always been an age-old adage as well.
Yeah, and that's an excellent, point that you make. But one thing, right, not specifically related to this question, but I can give a holistic approach of how organizations, right, whether it's governmental or public or private organizations, should be looking at carbon footprint as a whole, right? I think earlier on I had mentioned about E, S, and G, right? And this dovetails with the E piece of the ESG, right? One of the things that many companies have embarked on is to understand their carbon footprint. Right? The carbon footprint hits us in many ways, right? Whether it's just electricity that we consume, the car that we drive. So what companies are embarking on is doing a holistic assessment of all the major drivers that currently has an impact from a greenhouse, or a carbon footprint standpoint, and then risk rank it to make sure what changes they can make to get the maximum benefits, right? It's everything, there has to be a cost efficiency factor in play, as we look at these things. So it's a pecking order. And this is what most companies are doing. Here is an inventory of all the things that impact, from a carbon footprint standpoint. Here are the top 5 changes that I plan to do within the next 18 months, 5 years, 10 years, all the way through 2050, when hopefully there is, a zero emission, specifically from the vehicle standpoint. So that is something all organizations have already embarked on. I don't know, it probably doesn't answer the question, but it all comes down to doing an assessment and figuring out where the low hanging fruit is, and then start making changes.
Yep, great comments. Let's see, thanks for sharing your experience with the unusable charging stations. Will we also need to identify and implement additional security measures and costs to ensure they're not suspect to vandalism? We might, right? I mean, it sort of depends where they are. When they're at a Royal Farms and there's cameras all around, that's helpful. And I think it will depend on where those stations are. I will tell you the station that I ended up using was in the middle of a field in Oxford, Maryland, around nothing else. And it was the only one that worked, and no security there, and it was working fine. So it's a good question though. It's a good question. I don't know if there are any other comments on that. Got a few more questions before we wrap up. Okay, how much of government funding is going into encouraging individual personal transportation versus public transportation infrastructure? For example, SoCal has so many electric vehicles running, but not much public transport exists except in downtown of Southern California. Well, I think that's a great question. I'm a huge supporter of public transit. If we were just to replace every single vehicle on the road right now with all electric vehicles, there would still be problems, congestion and gridlock, and people would still have a hard time to get to work. So I think, public transportation is incredibly important, and we have a long ways to go in Maryland. Our public transit systems, we have the MTA, the Maryland Transit Administration, and the Washington, Maryland Area Transportation Authority, WMATA, that runs Metro. And, both of them need work. MTA in particular, its lines, our light rail, our bus system, our heavy rail break down more than any other comparable system in the country because of lack of investments. We are about $2 billion in the hole between what is needed to maintain a state of good repair over the next 10 years in the MTA system and what is allocated. It's a huge, huge problem. So we absolutely need more investment in our transit system and to be building out alternate modes besides just more roads and more cars. We have to keep in mind that when we build a road, we can also put, BRT, bus rapid transit on it. We can put buses on it. So we have to make sure that we're, I think, investing in multimodal transportation. It's a dual-pronged, or multi-pronged solution. Other folks want to weigh in on public transit as a complement and working together with EV infrastructure.
I just think that public transit and I put school bus transit in that public transit bucket are just the ideal opportunity. And the reason why is because most of those routes are predictable. And they come back every single day, and they're on a certain route every single day. You can check ridership and viewership, ridership. So you know how much weight's going to be on that vehicle every single day. So it's the perfect thing to try. And I think that a couple of people have talked about implementation phases. The commercial space, I think, is that space.
Yeah, I would add that, in Montgomery County, and I'm working on a school bus bill to help encourage some of the jurisdictions to purchase them because electric school buses are significantly more expensive than regular diesel burning school buses. But the advantages, not only from a climate perspective, but from a huge advantage from a public health perspective. But there's also an energy storage perspective. Like we talked earlier about, kind of one of the big holy grails here is we have to generate as much electricity from renewables as we can. But when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, there's a really huge piece of this, which is storage. That is the really next big frontier. And there's battery storage, there's all kinds of storage. And one of the things that electric school buses do, which really helps make the numbers work. In Montgomery County, Montgomery County government MCPS did a $158 million deal with a company to transition all 1,300 school buses in Montgomery County over to electric in 12 years. And one of the reasons they were able to make that work is because the maintenance for electric vehicles is significantly less. And there's so many issues, but one of the big ones is that you can store the electricity during the day, especially if you do it from renewables, because that's what we want, right? And then backfeed the grid in peak hours, like a coal peaker plant would do in the middle of the summer when everybody comes home at 4 or 5 o'clock and they flip on the air conditioning and there's this massive peak demand. Well, if you can pull off of 500 or 1,000 parked school buses that aren't using that electricity because they don't run in the summer, that's like a mobile battery electric storage plant that is being utilized. And I think that's something that is a whole other piece of this conversation, but thank you.
That's great. I know that we had one final panelist who just joined. So I'm going to ask her to just join us, Christy Gronke, and say a few words from her perspective on transportation and energy. Christy's with BGE. Thanks so much for joining us, Christy.
Thanks for having me. So BGE has been offering electric vehicle programs to our customers since July of 2019. We have rebates for residential customers that purchase and install charging stations for their home. We're also incentivizing property managers and developers that install charging stations at apartments, condos, and other multi-unit dwelling residences. And then as you see behind me, BGE is installing 500 of our own public charging stations throughout our service territory. We have to install those charging stations on government sites. So they have to be either a state, county, or a local municipality property. So we've been focused on libraries, parks, park and rides, and community colleges and some schools. So the point of our network is to deploy charging stations where customers are going every day. So they start to see them at, they're in their local communities and feel comfortable making the switch. We have 150 of our charging stations live today with a total of 422 that are in progress. So getting close to that 500 number. Expect several more sites to be energized by the end of 2021.
And could you tell us what is the wattage, or how fast are these? What level chargers are these?
Sure. So we're deploying a mix of level 2 and DC fast chargers, mainly level 2. Right now we are deploying an 80% level 2 installation and 20% DC fast chargers. And a lot of places that we're going level 2 makes sense. You're going to be at a park for at least an hour, most likely a library for some period of time. So we do a lot of level 2 installations, and then in some cases, DC fast chargers as well, if they're, like a courthouse or somewhere that you might be stopping by for a shorter period of time. So we're installing 50 kW charging DC fast charging stations, and we've also deployed 10 150 DC fast chargers. Those are at BWI, and we're siting another 10 in Baltimore City. So we've partnered with Lyft to provide a ride sharing program to customers focused in Baltimore City. We will work with Lyft to purchase 100 electric vehicles, and we're installing the 150 kW charging stations to support recharging those vehicles. And the level 2 charging stations are, I think, 14 kW. I'm not sure the speed of the level 2s per se.
Got it. Great. Thank you for that. There are a few more questions before we wrap up. So to Corey Neal from Joanne, can you talk about the use of renewable diesel or biodiesel in buses? Is that a way to reduce carbon emissions immediately while we wait for electrifications? Have you spoken to anyone at Optimus Technologies to use their B100 technology, or is there any plan or desire to use biomethane or renewable natural gas to fuel buses?
Yeah, so it is a way. It's not the cleanest solution, but it is a cleaner solution. So as we're going in that direction of becoming cleaner, every little bit helps, especially when you're talking about the amount of vehicles. A couple customers of ours, DC Water, DC Public Works, have adopted this technology. A lot of them are in their refuse vehicles, in those trash trucks, essentially. When you think about the weight, those are actually perfect applications to become cleaner, but may not be suitable for something like electrification due to the weight variance that they have to carry. Very familiar with Optimus. They're out of Pittsburgh. They actually are doing a lot. I'm actually working with them on a customer right now to overhaul 10 units. It'll be quite interesting because this customer is not a government customer. It is a business ran customer. So I think that in this whole conversation, a lot of the energy and effort is being pushed toward government entities. There's still a lot of owner operators and a lot of small businesses that are in this commercial space, whether it is in trash hauling, transportation, or whatever it may be. So that's something that we're going to have to address, because it's not as easy for a personal business to do the level of things that we're able to do from a matter of infrastructure. So when you say something like a B10, this is something that may be more advantageous, where we're still not getting at the level of 100% clean. It is much cleaner than what we are burning today. So yes on all fronts, I guess, is the best way to answer that.
Thank you. That's great. So 2 more questions. Have there been any discussions with the Maryland Department of Education to focus on vocational training around clean energy needs? So with MSDE, or other, I would think, frankly, another way to think about this is through our apprenticeship programs. So the IBEW, of course, does a great apprenticeship program, and I know that I think they will be certainly instrumental in training and preparing a workforce that's ready to deal with and meet the needs around our EV infrastructure. Other thoughts on voc training and job creation around clean energy needs in the transportation industry from anyone?
Okay, I would say I think it's a great question. It's a great comment, and I think one of the things we should start thinking about is even at the high school level, because you have a lot of vocational opportunities for high school kids, and there are this is the future, like, period. So I think it does a disservice to a lot of our students that are 17 or 18 years old, or even younger or older, to train them on the ways of ICE vehicles, because that has kind of a limited future. I'm not sure exactly what that future is. There'll always be some of those around, but to get them into tomorrow's job today is really where we should be going. So I think there's a lot of high school opportunities.
Yep. Any other thoughts?
PGE hasn't done the vocational training yet, but we did do a program this summer with Morgan State's Transportation Institute. It was middle schoolers that participated in the summer program, and we did 2 sessions within that month-long summer program to educate those students on electric vehicles. The focus of that session was safety, so focusing on the safety elements of electric vehicles. We did a lot of demonstrations of our charging stations and had great engagement from that group.
I'll just add one thing to what Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo had mentioned, right? Kids today, right? You talk about a Tesla, right? The reason I'm bringing up Tesla is my 8-year-old, asks me, when am I going to buy a Tesla, right? Because for them, right, it's a new fancy thing. The concept of EV is inculcated in the kids in a very different manner. Whether it's marketing, free marketing for Tesla or Lucid or any one of these companies, But today, right, Tesla is synonymous with EV, and that's actually driving a lot of what should I say, interests in the kids, because everybody wants to know about EV, right? My 8-year-old is asking me what an EV is, Trust me, till I was 35, I did not know what an EV was. You just see that the paradigm shift that's happening because kids more and more are interested, right? In some ways, right? The school system, right? Whether we have a training program or not, there is a lot of awareness as to how we need to be socially responsible, right? Socially responsible includes, amongst other things, being mindful of the carbon footprint. So I see kids, younger and younger, the 10-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, the 15-year-olds getting more interested in this, just because there is a lot of attention and people are talking about this. The more the adults talk about it, there's going to be awareness, in the kids, starting with an early age.
Yep. That is a great point. And our final question is from PJ Hogan. What state programs can be put in place to incentivize private sector short haul trucking distribution companies to convert from gas to EV? Very good question. And I think we have some people who can answer it from different perspectives here. So if a few of you want to hop in and say, is there a role for government to incentivize, trucking distribution companies or short haulers to convert? And if there is a role for government, what is the role? And how do we make sure that we're doing it in a way that's financially or fiscally responsible and equitable?
So I'll take a stab at this from the side of the consumer, and I'm assuming that Delegate Fraser will take a stab at it from the side of the government. But I think that there's definitely a role to play. I think that one of the things that people don't realize is how small the margins are in that transportation industry. So there are huge costs to this. One of the things, our electric school bus is almost 3 to 4 times the amount of our typical diesel school bus. So there's a gap between that. So I think that there has to be a role played, not only in that, but I think somebody also talked earlier about infrastructure. These chargers aren't inexpensive, but they are, and the good ones that work all the time are even a little bit more expensive. So you have to make sure that we're not only addressing just the vehicles themselves, but we're also addressing the infrastructures that are going to be able to charge the vehicles. To the point earlier, we can have great technology in vehicles, but if we don't have the people and the infrastructure to charge and move them, they do us no good. And the second piece on that, I think, was really unique and interesting is not only that, but just the availability. I think that oftentimes owner operators who are running these small transportation fleets, they don't have this level of knowledge. They're not on these calls. They're not on these where they're getting the information being fed to them. So oftentimes you can say, hey, did you know this grant is available? Do you know that this funding is available? And they'll say, I had no idea. I had no clue. So I think that making sure that we have a clear route to communicate to the smaller transportation companies, to those short haulers that, hey, this is available to you. It's not very hard for you to do. And obviously, hey, your profit margins are going to be the same. We're going to figure that out. But at the end of the day, we're going to have a greener community that you're going to be able to thrive in for a much longer period of time than the community that we currently have in today.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I think you hit everything. A couple of things from a technical perspective. I think that some of the battery electric short deliveries are here. Delegate Learman and I worked on a bill last year that passed. We called it the R2D2 bill, fondly because it allows for very short, like kind of suburban deliveries of an autonomous, looks like an R2D2 bot that just will deliver very short things. It's all electric. But as we get bigger, I think that some of the battery technology is here for short haul. For the long haul, I think that really what this seems to be we're looking at is hydrogen. So the question is, how do we make that transition? And if you take one of those trucks off the road from a carbon footprint perspective, from an environmental justice perspective, and also, again, from a public health perspective, just one of those trucks is equal to probably anywhere between 3 and 6 or 8 cars, like ICE cars. So yeah, I think there's great opportunities. I'm happy to work with anybody who has some ideas on how we can kind of transition that. I will say that if Congress can get this $3.5 trillion deal done, we'll get some money here in Maryland, and I will be at the forefront of figuring out how to spend it as environmentally and climate change transitionally as possible.
That's great. And so there was one final question that came in earlier before Christy joined. Christy, are utilities looking to partner with local governments and private sector partners to construct and manage charging infrastructure? How is BGE? What are you all working on?
Yeah, so we've been partnering with a lot of government entities through our public charging installations. As I mentioned, they have to be on government site hosts. We also received a grant last summer, a grant award from the Federal Department of Energy to do a large-scale demonstration of managed charging. So we're in the design phase right now. We'll be running different events on residential customers, from sending them behavioral messages, encouraging them to schedule their charge, to directly controlling their charging station. We'll also be messaging them as regards to public charging station. So if you don't charge, or price signaling to charge on different feeders to understand, how customers respond and the impacts of that. And then also working with fleet customers, we'll be providing charging stations to fleet customers and working with them to develop a charging schedule to understand that load. We have to recruit 2,000 customers into this demonstration, and we expect to gain a lot of learnings from this DOE grant and roll them into a future full customer program as EV adoption continues to grow.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to kick it back over to our host today, but this was a great panel and a great discussion. Thank you all very much for joining. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your expertise and your thoughts. And thank you to all the attendees for the work that you are doing in this space as well. Thank you for the great questions.
Delegate Learman, you're a great moderator. We're happy to have you anytime.
Thanks.
This topic is certainly timely and important. Lots of work to be done. I imagine that our leaders will start to think about how government can influence more rapid adoption of charging infrastructure so that we can move the needle in the way that leaders like Delegate Fraser Hidalgo envision. Christy, your work at the utility is really key. And Corey, we know that you've got vehicles that are ready to roll out, and anybody that wants to consult with you. And I think probably Kwame could help with some financing and thinking through tax credits. So this is a great team. Please feel free to consult with them at your convenience. I want to thank all of our panelists for their time today and their expertise. As you exit the program, we want to thank the audience and remind you that we have 5 more sessions coming up of the series. Our next session, September 30th, is equity in the energy marketplace. Lots to talk about there. And we'll be featuring some others on financing and workforce readiness, and then closing with a really, really exciting session on innovation ahead, what's happening in the advanced energy and carbon emission reduction discovery session. So please join us. Once again, just to remind you, the recordings will be available online at www.mdcleanenergy.org/speaker series. Thanks again for joining us. We'll call that a wrap and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.